I am Ashely Wright, here to teach with Monica tonight. I am a certified peer recovery and support specialist. I work for Wellness in the Woods in Mission 61, and I'll let Monica introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Monica Yeadon. I am a certified peer specialist and a licensed graduate social worker. I am employed by Wellness in the Woods as the Director of Process Improvement and Communications. I also am the director of our virtual peer support network program, which offers virtual peer support every day from 9 to 5. And tonight, we are going to share with all of you parts of our story. We've named it Curing the Uncurable. Both Ashely and I have lived experience with borderline personality disorder, and we're going to share about how we have overcome that. And yeah, I don't want to give too much away. So a little bit about what we'll talk about. We'll talk about what it's like to live with borderline personality disorder, what our experience was like with that. And then we'll talk about how we came to treatment. We both have relatively different stories, but then we'll also talk about the themes within those stories. And we'll kind of give an overview of the recommended treatment for BPD. And then we'll also talk about what it's like to live in recovery from BPD and what that experience has been like for each of us. So we're going to start by sharing what it was like for us. And this is the second time we've given this presentation. And when we first started talking about how to share this part of it, we didn't want to stand up here and like lay our entire lives on the line for all of you, because I'm sure we've all heard that and it's exhausting from our perspective. So what we decided to do, if we could go to the next slide, is we have the diagnostic criteria for borderline personality disorder, and I know that's really small for you guys. Last time we gave this, it was on Zoom, so it was right in everyone's face, and so we didn't have to adjust, but we will read them out for you as we go through. So borderline personality disorder is defined in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for where all of the diagnoses for mental health conditions live. It is defined in there as a pervasive pattern of instability of interpersonal relationships, self-image, and affects, and marked impulsivity beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 5 or more of the following. And then it has a list of 9 things. And so what Ashely and I have decided to do is we're going to go through this list and we'll talk about what each kind of number felt like from our perspective and how that manifested in our lives, in our experience. So the first one is a frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. When I was really quite ill, in early 2015, I had been dating a guy for 3 months, and I found out that he had cheated on me, and I was scared. It terrified me because I'd been cheated on a lot, and even after only 3 months, I decided the only logical way to deal with that was to move in with him. So that was how my frantic effort to avoid that. Well, it felt like real abandonment, but it was also very much imagined in that context as well.
Yeah, I can relate to that one a lot too. I dealt with real abandonment early on, and I think that formulated a lot of why I ended up with borderline. I can also relate to like imagined abandonment, really clinging on to people, moving in with guys right away, having children with guys right away, just wanting to settle down and not be left, you know, not deal with that abandonment, the pain of abandonment, and anything I could do to avoid that. The second characteristic is a pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships characterized by alternating between extremes of idealization and devaluation. That one for me was a long string of unstable and intense ones. I found out now, growing up the way I did in an abusive and toxic home life, I sought that same sort of person out in my romantic relationships and things like that. I would idolize them, even though they would be abusive or it would be a very negative environment. They'd still be like, I would always, blame myself for those situations, thinking I was the problem and deserved to be treated that way. So it was like a lot of devaluation of myself and not any self-worth on that I should not be treated that way. Just anything to not be alone, very codependent, very just clingy to people.
Yeah, that particular characteristic of a BPD is often summarized as, I hate you, don't leave me. That kind of like pushing people away and then pulling them back in and getting mad when they actually leave when you push them away. It's very fun. Number 3 is identity disturbance, markedly and persistently unstable self-image or sense of self. This is what I call the runaway bride characteristic. If anyone has seen that movie with Julia Roberts, she leaves a lot of men at the altar is the premise of the movie. And in it, a journalist is doing a story, and he asks every guy that she had left, how did she like her eggs? And every single guy answered the same way I like them. That's what this is. It's not really knowing your own identity in any way and just kind of clinging on to what is close. So like for me, personally, through a lot of my life, I defined my taste in music based on who I was dating at the time. So like I was dating a guy that liked country music, so I was a big country music fan. I was dating a guy that liked hip hop or whatever, and so I really liked hip hop for a time. And then I was living with someone that really liked country music again, and so then I really liked country music, even though she was just a friend, but she was an important part of my life. And so I had never really known what my own personal taste in music is, or was. I've come to learn now that I really will listen to just about anything, and I prefer podcasts over music, is what I've learned now. But that's what the identity disturbance can look like, is just always agreeing with what the people in your life like.
That's what it was like for me as well, like all throughout my life, kind of being a chameleon of sorts, like just having this intense desire to always fit in, to always be liked. I never knew who I really was because I was conforming to whoever and whatever around me and didn't know who I really was, like she said, like I liked. And I'll get to recovery story later, but coming into recovery, like once all that was gone, it was just like, I don't know what's left. I don't know anything about myself. So number 4, impulsivity in at least 2 areas that are potentially self-damaging. I dealt with impulsivity very strongly from as far back as I can remember. That kind of manifested in a lot of different ways. That could be a lot of addictions to various things, drug and alcohol addiction, sex addiction, things like that. Really any uncomfortable feeling I would have or not wanting to sit and feel anything unpleasant, I would impulsively run to whatever would fill that void for the moment. And for a majority of my life, that was addictions and things like that, and never really finding that balance into my life, until I would come to have like a faith journey and find that that's what kind of filled that hole in the soul for me.
Yeah. I personally never struggled with any kind of substance use challenges. However, I did live and survive a sex addiction that was really it was pretty intense. Number 5 is recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures or threats, or self-mutilating behavior. So the story that comes to mind for me was back in college. I had met up with an old flame, and we hung out, and then he left. And when he left, I said, if you don't come back, I'm going to kill myself. And he didn't want to reinforce that behavior, so he sent his best friend, and his best friend spent 3 hours with me in my hotel room. And I did not remember. I still actually don't remember that. They told me about it 10 years later. But that is the kind of thing that would happen, is I would often default to threats of suicide, as opposed if I ever imagined, kind of going back up to that imagined abandonment. If I ever felt like someone was thinking about leaving, I'd be like, well, if you do that, I'm going to kill myself. Never once did I feel like I actually had a real desire to die, but it was kind of like the thing in my back pocket that I would pull out pretty frequently.
Yeah, that's the same for me also. Like I did have a lot of suicidal ideation and things like that and had some close calls, but it was also a manipulation tactic to keep people from running from me. The self-mutilating behavior, in my teen years, I dealt with a lot of problems in my home life and things like that, and that kind of manifested by beginning self-mutilating behavior, cutting, burning, things like that. For me, it was a release of all the internal pain that I couldn't house, that was just miserable for me. It was a way to get that out of me in a way, very unhealthy way, but I'd carry that through most of my life. Up until about 7 years ago, I struggled a lot with self-mutilating behavior.
Number 6 is affective instability due to a marked reactivity of mood. And neither one of us could come up with a solid story with this one, but I will tell you, it was like being your emotions were outside of you and they had you on a leash and they could yank you any which way, and just absolutely no control over any decisions I made, it felt like. And if I was emotionally intense for any reason at any time, I would just do what the emotion told me to do and not even think twice about it. And it was an exhausting way to live, is probably the most clear way I could put it. It was exhausting. I was tired all the time. I was mad all of the time. And it was not fun.
Mm-hmm. And marked reactivity of mood for me was just a lot of high highs and low lows, reactions to things that were way off the charts of where your average responses would be. A lot of people would throw out, are you bipolar, because of the reactions that I would have, because they would just be to such an extreme one way or the other. And like you said, it was really just a really unhappy existence for a long time, because I'd have these extreme reactions and then behaviors or say things, and then I'd have additional consequences to what happened there, and then it was just kind of a snowball effect, and it could go on into infinity kind of thing with that. So number 7 is chronic feelings of emptiness. I kind of mentioned that before. I struggled with depression for a majority of my life, dealing with childhood traumas and different things, and being in survivor mode for so long, not knowing who I really was on things. There was really nothing that ever fulfilled me, and that's where addictions and things like that came into play. I was just trying to fill that emptiness that was never going to be filled, and it led to a lot of, like I mentioned, self-harm and suicidal behavior, because it felt like it was never going to end. And sometimes it would just be such a major depression that it would just drag me down so deeply, and it was just this chronic feeling of emptiness. And then number 8, sorry, did you have anything for 7?
For me, it was also just completely empty of any purpose. I felt like I had no purpose in life. Like, why am I here? I don't understand why I'm here. Mm-hmm. It was just empty.
So number 8, inappropriate, intense anger or difficulty controlling anger. For my life, I had a very hot temper. Like I said, very high highs and low lows. The littlest thing could really set me off. And I had very explosive anger reactions, from yelling, screaming, breaking things. I did abuse people on a couple of occasions, just very out of control with my anger, very intense. A lot of times it wouldn't even fit the situation. It would be one circumstance and I would see it in a completely different light and go off the rails about it, and it wasn't even reality.
Yeah, I already said I was angry all the time. Mm-hmm. For 7 years straight. It's exhausting. Number 9 is transient stress-related paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms. So for me, what that felt like was always being convinced that any guy that looked at me was bound to cheat on me. Bound. It was just a matter of time. And so, you know what? I'm just going to not even try. And just never really gave relationships a really actual honest effort, looking back on it now. Because I was just always so paranoid that I was going to get hurt, because I'd been hurt so many times in my life, and I wasn't going to deal with that anymore. I also have experienced a couple episodes of dissociation, where I just feel like my body is not mine, and I don't belong to that body, and I don't belong to anybody, and it's just a weird feeling. Not nearly as scary as some of the other things, though.
I had that too, the stress-related paranoia. I'd find that in relationships too, where I was just convinced I did have a lot of toxic relationships, but I get to the point that any relationship I was in, I was convinced he was going to cheat, he was going to hurt me and things like that. I even had one partner tell me, yeah, I did finally cheat because you accused me of it all the time. So I was like, if I'm going to get the punishment, I might as well do the crime kind of thing. So, kind of created my own misery there a little bit sometimes.
So how did we get out of that? We both have very, very different stories for how we came to treatment. And so, okay, I can share mine first.
Sure.
So mine came to a head. So during all of that we just described, it started in, looking back now, I can identify that the symptoms probably started in 2008, somewhere in there. And I knew something was wrong. They started in college where I majored in psychology. So I knew something was wrong. And I figured it was depression or anxiety, and I went to, in the following 7 years, I think I went through, 8 or 9 therapists. Every single one of them did a diagnostic assessment. Every single one of them told me depression, anxiety. And I just didn't stick with any of them. None of them seemed to help me, so I would just ghost them and not go. And then I would come upon a high and be like, I don't need therapy. And then I would get low again, and I'd be like, I should go to therapy. But instead of seeking out the old therapist, I would always just jump to a new one, because that one didn't help me, so why would I go back to that one? And I went through so many therapists. I don't even know the number. And none of them ever once raised an eyebrow and said, well, let's take a look at that diagnosis. Let's see if there's something more. Not a single one of them. Until in 2015, that first story I told where I decided to move in with the guy after he cheated on me after 3 months, I got really, my mental health got really bad at that point. And my self-esteem was in the toilet, and I was trying to find the right meds with a general practitioner, and there was a miscommunication between that practitioner, the pharmacist, and me, and I ended up overdosing on a med that sent me into a manic state, and for 2 days straight, my leg didn't stop doing this, and I did not sleep for 3 days. Eventually, that culminated into intense suicidal ideation. But at this point, I had my son. He was 4 at the time, and I knew I didn't want to take myself away from him. I didn't think I was worthy of living, but I knew he deserved to have a mom. And so I drove myself to an emergency room, and I checked in. And I ended up at Mayo Clinic in Rochester. I'm from down there. And their psychiatric unit there is called Generos, and I ended up in Generos. I got there really late at night, and the next morning, a doctor came in and gave me a questionnaire. And I was like, what's this for? And they're like, just fill it out. And I'm like, okay. And then I start filling it out, and I looked back up at the nurse, and I was like, have you been following me around for 5 years? How did you get these questions? Because they're way too personal. And so turns out that was a diagnostic tool for borderline personality disorder. And then they did that, and they did interviews and whatever, and then the doctor came back in, and I'll never forget this moment. The doctor was in the room, as well as that same nurse, and the doctor said, you have borderline personality disorder. And before I could even process that, the nurse spoke up, and she said, but this is good news, because it is so treatable. I'm going to pause the story there. I can't tell you how many times I have heard stories from other people that received that diagnosis and a completely opposite message in the same moment. I was really lucky. I was really lucky to have that particular nurse in the room, because I don't know, she gave me a lot of strength to actually commit to the treatment and go through the treatment. She held the hope for me in that moment, because I wouldn't have believed it was treatable if she hadn't told me it was. But because she told me it was, it gave me that much more reason to fight. And so, back to the story. So then she So then they were like, we're going to start you on some of the treatment, but we're mostly going to focus on getting you in an outpatient program and getting you discharged. And so I was in the psychiatric unit for 10 days. And then when I got out, I started a treatment program, and then I ended up with a new therapist. Her name was Mandy, and I didn't have access to that nurse anymore, obviously, because I wasn't inpatient, but Mandy started holding the hope for me. And I'll never forget, about 3 or 4 months into my treatment, I remember like actually looking back and thinking, the signs were there for 7 years, and nobody said a thing. Nobody said a thing. Not one. And I remember telling Mandy, that I think the system must be broken. That's the only way that explains that. With all the privileges that I've been granted in my life, the way I look and the way I was raised and all of the things, like, there has to be a broken system here. And she goes, it is. It's very broken. And I said, well, someone should fix it. And she goes, yes, you should. That day, I started researching Master of Social Work programs. And I started in 2017, and I graduated with my MSW last July. Yeah, so I no longer meet the diagnostic criteria for borderline personality disorder. So that's my coming to treatment story. Now Ashley's going to share hers. No.
All right, so my coming to treatment story is a little bit different than Monica's. Not quite sure where to start. So I found out that I had the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder a couple of years ago. I was being seen by a therapist for other issues. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder in 2016. I have a history of different diagnoses. I don't know if that's misdiagnosis or what, just a plethora of diagnoses for me, but I had major depression and oppositional defiance in my teens. Was told I had bipolar in 2016. There's a whole long story, and I've shared my testimony before, but years of addiction and substance use. Around that time, I started getting help for the bipolar, a couple of years of being lost in that. But getting into recovery and things like that, and going through a few different therapists, trying EMDR and things like that, I kind of landed with this therapist. So long story short, being treated for like bipolar and complex PTSD. So how I found out that I had the diagnosis, probably a year at that time, and things were seemingly going well with her. I sought out a Christian counselor, and I thought that would be a good relationship. Things were all right with her. I don't remember the reason why, but I pulled up. We did a diagnostic assessment, and about 6 months later, I was going through my chart looking for something and looked back at the most recent diagnostic, and it had borderline personality disorder on it. And I was like, well, where'd that come from? So I brought it to her. I was actually very upset. I think I called Monica as soon as I saw it. I'm like, this is on here. I don't know when and how it got on there and whatnot. And I brought it to the therapist, and she tried to convince me that she had told me. And I had this whole thing where I was like, no, I definitely would have remembered that. My diagnoses have always been kind of stigmatized to me. They've been a big deal to me. I definitely would have remembered you telling me that. So kind of had it out with her on that, and then was kind of hit with this crossroads of like a new diagnosis. If you heard my story, I went through a lot dealing with bipolar. So getting an updated diagnosis like that, it was kind of defeating at first. I just thought, like a lot of people think, that it was another thing that I'd have for life. They kind of beat it into my head, I'll have bipolar forever, so now I have BPD, which I was given the same idea about. So it was really defeating, thinking I'd have another card stacked against me, another thing I'd have to battle with. And I didn't get much support from that therapist. I turned to Monica a lot. At the time I found this out with the diagnosis and whatnot, Monica had just shared her story of recovery with us. And she was really the only person I knew that it had even come out that she had borderline. I didn't really know anybody else. I didn't know much about it. So I went to her and had discussions with her and explained what was happening with my therapist. And she very kindly took me under her wing and talked me through these things, let me express myself, all the emotions that were running through me. By this point, I'd come to a really good point in recovery. So like the defeatedness, if that's a word, of the new, label I kind of had there. Instead of going out and using drinking or getting high or anything like that to deal with this hard news, instead, I went the opposite direction with it. I'm like, okay, they're telling me I have this, so I'm just going to learn about it. So first thing I did was like talked with Monica, went to the library to try and seek out any literature I could get on borderline to understand what it is and whatnot. There's not a whole lot out there that I could find. Even on Amazon, there wasn't much. What I ended up with was a BPD book from the family's perspective, which was better than nothing, I figured. So I got that, and I was reading about it, and it was from the family's perspective, but it gave a lot of insight into what BPD was, and it was very fitting for me. And after the initial kind of shock and unpleasant feelings of getting this diagnosis and the whole situation with the therapist, it kind of came to a place of peace where it was like, as I was reading about it, it was like the puzzle pieces kind of fitting back into the puzzle. It was like made a lot of sense to me. It explained like all my whole life. Like bipolar eventually made sense to me in the high highs and the low lows and the manic episodes and like psychiatric symptoms and things like that. But when I looked at borderline, it really explained how life had been like for me all throughout my childhood, when I would deal with black and white thinking, 0 or 100, the explosive emotions, the acting out with drugs and alcohol and sex and all these different things. It all really made sense and fit together for me. So it was actually a relief to have this, but I was faced with, what do I do with this therapist that I feel really wronged me? And spent a lot of time in consult with Monica. She didn't sway me one way or the other on anything. We'll talk a little bit more about it in a couple slides, but I got into DBT, and I had tried to do that a few years ago when I was dealing with CPS and things like that in a really rough time, and I wasn't able to finish it, but it had always been in the back of my mind a really useful program and something that I was on my wish list to complete in my life. And I had heard that Monica went through DBT. She actually was teaching it at the time all this was happening and still does. So that was an option for me. So then I was kind of swaying between staying with this therapist, and the therapist was pushing for me not to go off to DBT, but then I was kind of, doing a pros and cons of sorts. I think you even suggested I do that. And I looked really closely at it and looked at my options, and that's a phenomenal treatment for BPD. And with Monica sharing how she no longer met the criteria for borderline, that was also super hopeful for me because I saw that it was treatable, that you could overcome it. I had kind of a pipe dream that maybe that could happen for me one day. Like, I never thought in a million years it would happen within a year, but it did. And I also no longer meet the criteria for borderline. And I'll share my story of recovery, how that kind of played out. But I always had Monica there for me. She was like my beacon of hope. Somebody just like me. It's beautiful that we're peer specialists, and she's also a peer to me, and we have so many similarities in our stories. And with having that and seeing her recover and do so well, and like she said, all the plethora of degrees she has, it's just like, she was very much an inspiration to me. So I saw it work for her, and I believe that it could work for me. And something you had the nurse, and I had you. She believed that I could get better too. She was there for me. She didn't judge me. She didn't tell me what to do with my life, like, I had dealt with previously throughout my story. It was really just presenting options and letting me talk it through, and that's what we do, like with peer work, is not telling anybody what to do with their lives, but giving them options, sharing what worked for us, what are options for you, and then letting you come to your own choices and really design your own recovery pathway. And that's really what Monica enabled me to do in our story together. So I'll stop there.
So the question, after hearing both of our I turned it back on, but anyway, the question we had for all of you after hearing both of our stories, and I think Dom is on mic duty here, but what themes or similarities do you see between the two stories? Like how is it that we had such different lives and then we were still able to hit the same goal? We're using the mics because we are streaming this, and we want to make sure
Determination.
everyone could hear. Determination, yeah, I would say. We were both.
Yeah, we're just using the mic because we're going to stream it, and then it'll be on the YouTube channel. So any feedback we had in the room tonight, we'll also open it up for questions at the end. But we thought we'd have like some participation a little bit, open it up for open mic, for you guys to throw out, you know, themes and similarities you've seen in our stories.
I think you both had somebody that gave you hope, that could cheer you on, that things could get better, and that makes all the difference.
It really does.
You both spoke about all these other diagnoses and that you didn't fit them and what was going on in that loss, but the continued symptoms. It drove you both to see what else was going on with yourselves.
I feel like you both had problems with like the system with your therapists and with kind of a lack of concern in on their part.
Big issues with the system.
Anybody else?
Awesome.
You can bring me the mic back.
Thank you all for, yeah,
for
yeah.
giving feedback. That's something I think we'll get into too here in a slide is some of the negative connotations that come with the disorder and the way it's looked at clinically, kind of the breaks in the system that need to be changed and what we're kind of fighting for. And that's a big reason why we're here tonight and why we've done a lunch and learn. And hopefully we get to do this in the future, is to bring a voice for the people that have the lived experience of this and just walking proof that it is treatable. You know, we can overcome and we can get better. And, you know, just two examples of how something that's looked at as maybe not treatable, not curable, that a lifelong thing really is.
Yeah, that's why we titled it Curing the Uncurable, is because often it is seen as the uncurable mental health diagnosis. So many people that work in the field don't believe that it can actually be cured. And through determination and fortune and hope holders, we were able to prove that wrong. But I remember when Ashely called me and told me she no longer fit the criteria, it was a it was a pretty happy day for both of us. And we actually, so I live down by Rochester, she lives up here, and I was like, we have to get dinner. And so we met in Inver Grove Heights. We both drove over an hour just to get dinner because we needed to celebrate this together. And it was actually at that dinner where we came up with the title, Curing the Uncurable, because we'd both heard it so much, and we still hear it from the people we work with, that they're told, you're going to have it for the rest of your life. There's no way to get out of it, blah, 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 blah. And we're walking proof that that's not true. And we need to stop that narrative because it is blocking the hope for so many. So, go to the next slide. We work together. So we both work at Wellness in the Woods. We started working together in May of 21, right?
Yeah, it's been 2 years, 2.5 years for me. So I started with Imagine Network that we do, that some of you guys participate in still today, and then moved more towards VPSN. And just for fun, I want to share another story. So when I first came on VPSN, Monica was not yet director, but she was a very prominent person in the program. She teaches DBTs Fridays, and I kind of just got started. And then it was really my first role in peer support that big. I had worked in a treatment center, but came on. I started with Imagine Network, and then I came on VPSN and worked shifts with Monica and things like that. In the beginning, I was very standoffish. I was very unsure of myself. I still had, at that point, I had yet to be diagnosed. So I had, you know, the low self-esteem, low self-worth, feelings of emptiness, a lot of that going on. So getting on the virtual peer support network and being on Zoom in front of people, participants, and trying to add to the conversation and be a voice in it was very difficult for me. And we had a particular shift where Monica and I were co-hosts, and I was just kind of shut down the whole time, and I would get silent. And then the further it went along, the more I stayed silent because then it got awkward.
I don't think she said a single word in a 3-hour shift.
Yeah. And I'm supposed to be on there supporting her, talking with the people, and I just froze up completely. And it was basically 3 hours of Monica leading the room. And instead of meeting me with anger or frustration or anything like that, she's like, Ash, can you stay, after we close up the room? I'd like to chat with you a little bit. And the way she approached me is why I'm able to be the way I am today. She said, what's going on? Is everything okay? What can I do to support you? And it was really like touching to me, and she cared, and she wasn't judging me, and she wanted like the best for me and wanted me to be the best me that I could be. So her compassion and care in that is why I approach peer sport work the way that I do today, like honest and open and meeting people where they're at. And I wouldn't be able to be the way I am in my work today without Monica and the way she just made space for me in that moment. And that made it easier too, I think, later on when I got my diagnosis to come to you, because you had built that trust and that relationship with me by just showing me that you cared, like wholeheartedly just cared. And then that really opened the door. I think I wouldn't shut up after that. I was just like, I'm just going to be me. I'm going to be all over the place. I'm going to talk to everybody. And like VPSN completely changed for me after that. So
That's how we met.
Yeah, that's how we met.
That was one of our first couple shifts together, actually. So I'm going to let Ashely talk about DBT, because I do talk about TBT every Friday, as Ashely has alluded to. But I want to set it up a little bit. So dialectical behavior therapy, which is what DBT stands for, is a therapy model that was developed by a lady named Marsha Linehan in 1987, actually. Fun fact, but it didn't become in vogue until like the late 90s, early 2000s. So is when it started picking up. It was developed specifically to treat borderline personality disorder. That was its intended purpose. Marsha Linehan herself actually lives with borderline personality disorder. I don't know if you knew that.
I think I did.
Yeah. And so she developed the treatment from her experience working with clients, from her experience with her own personal journey, and also from her experience at a Buddhist temple. And since its development, so it was developed specifically for BPD, but since its development, and it's been tested with almost every single mental health diagnosis there is, and it has been proven effective for every mental health diagnosis outside of the delusional disorders. However, I've been teaching DBT since 2016, and at first it was with a local organization down in Rochester, and now I do it with Wellness in the Woods. But before, I had a gentleman that was coming every single week to my class for about 2 years, and he lived with schizophrenia, and he shared with me that it was helping him. So I have some anecdotal evidence, but there isn't any empirical evidence that it helps with the delusional disorders, but it is an amazing treatment, and I love it so much. And one of the key factors to keeping me in recovery is the fact that I am given the opportunity to teach it every Friday. So if anyone wants to see me teach DBT, it's Fridays at 11 on our virtual peer support network, and our website will be on a slide later on. But I'm going to let Ashely talk about what it actually is.
Okay, so DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, it is made up of 4 separate modules. I have come up here before and shared a little bit on DBT and hope to in the future. I did an intro to DBT, and I think it was emotion regulation that I was talking about. But there are 4 separate modules involved in the program. There's mindfulness. Do you want to talk about mindfulness? You're really good at it. You just did that, and I thought you did a great job on Friday.
So mindfulness is composed of 2 different sections. The first section is about the states of mind. So in DBT, we have 3 states of mind: reasonable mind, emotion mind, and wise mind is the interaction between the 2. And then the other set of skills within mindfulness in DBT are the what and how skills. So the what skills tell you what to do to practice mindfulness, and the how skills tell you how to do the what skill. It's a fun chart I have on my slides when I teach that, which is actually what the topic will be on this Friday, if anyone is interested.
And then the next module that they have is interpersonal effectiveness. for me, that was really learning how to communicate, how to effectively like get points across without getting heated, without getting escalated, without like screaming or yelling to try to make my point or have, you know, as Mary says, you know, anger says that we want something to change. So then what is that we want to change? And this is developing a way of communicating with people that's basically effective and is good for the relationship. It's good for the dynamics of things. And just handling it in a really healthy way and direct. Do you have anything? Nope. Okay. Yeah, so that's basically interpersonal effectiveness. It really helped me in my communication styles and helped not have so much dysfunction and like fights with people and things like that. It was kind of pick your battles sort of thing and know how to work with people. Emotion regulation is the next one. That's really, as it says, regulating emotions. With BPD, there's the feelings and emotions that we talked about before, like the high highs, low lows. You can have troubles with angers and outbursts and things like that. So emotion regulation is really just being able to maintain where you're at with your emotions, not spiking up so high on things, and really keeping it at a regulated level so you can like, and a lot of these work together. Like when you do emotion regulation, you're keeping yourself in check, and then theretofore you can have interpersonal effectiveness where you can communicate properly because you're not off the charts and out of control. And then the fourth one is distress tolerance. And again, that goes along with the other ones. It's really managing unpleasant emotions. My favorite thing with distress tolerance is a tip skill. That helped me a lot in early on when I would find myself so explosive and so reactive to things. Bringing that distress down in a healthy manner. So tip, I think I've taught on too, is so temperature, intense exercise, and paired muscle relaxation.
Paced breathing.
What did I say?
It's 2 Ps. There's 2
Oh,
Ps,
yeah,
pairs,
okay.
paired muscle relaxation and paced breathing.
Yes, paced breathing. Yeah, those were my go-to at first because when I first got into DBT, I felt kind of frustrated because it was so much practice and I didn't know if these skills would ever just come to mind in the moment. So in order to get to a place where I could utilize the skills I was being taught, I would have to use a lot of distress tolerance skills in the beginning when I was still all over the place emotionally to bring that down, the emotion regulation, the distress, to be able to behave effectively, communicate effectively, and handle things in the way that I wanted to be handling them and not creating more problems for myself.
Yeah, the other part I would add for is distress tolerance. So the parts that Ashely is talking about are called the crisis survival skills. So they're all about how to survive a mental health crisis without making it worse, without reverting into target behaviors or whatever that might look like for the individual. The other massive part of distress tolerance is called the reality acceptance set of skills. By far, it is the hardest set of skills in the entire book. It's a book this thick. It's also the most helpful. For me, reality acceptance kind of erased all of my anger. Like I remember working on it and working through it, and it's definitely one of those things where it gets better before it gets worse. I know that's cliche, but cliches are cliche for a reason. And it was slowly working through it, and I was feeling like I was almost there, and then I got caught off on traffic, and I didn't yell at the person. And I was like, whoa. It's working. So yeah, that's the other part of distress tolerance is learning how to accept reality as it is as opposed to how you want it to be or how you wish it to be.
Yeah.
I just didn't want
Is that like radical acceptance too? Like,
Well, reality acceptance is the subunit name, and then radical acceptance is a skill within reality acceptance.
okay.
And then it also includes turning the mind and willingness and willfulness and there's another one, willing hands and half smiling.
Yep.
Okay, so now we're going to move along and talk about some common misconceptions and stigmas. We're going to move 2 along. Of borderline personality disorder. So on this next slide, you'll see some of the attitudes. These were pulled from a research journal that I found online of different attitudes that mental health workers, so people in the field, had towards people living with borderline personality disorder. The first one made me laugh out loud when I saw it, and because it says, mental health workers feel that people with BPD have higher levels of distress and social dysfunction. And I just want to say, duh. That is literally, if you go 6 slides back or whatever it is, that is what defines the disorder. So, you think? The second one is that they feel that we're more dangerous. Now, we're only 2 people out of millions that live with the disorder. And I don't know, I guess I can't speak for Ashely, but the most dangerous person I ever was to myself. And I don't think people living with borderline personality disorder are necessarily inherently more dangerous than any other person on the planet. So I don't like stigmas anyway. But so this one made me raise my eyebrows too, was that a lot of mental health workers see people living with borderline personality disorder as having more control of their symptoms. Like it's not necessarily linked to anything in the brain chemistry. It's not necessarily linked to anything biological. So they think that all of our symptoms are choices. And I can tell you from experience that my emotions did not make those feel like they were choices. Looking back, I could see looking back, I could call it a choice, but it wasn't a choice at the time because I wasn't in control. People with borderline personality disorder are not in control of anything. Certainly not their symptoms. Another one is that treatment is futile. This is something we've talked about a couple times already, and a lot of people are told that there is no way to get over borderline personality disorder. There's no way to have it removed from your record. You will have it for life. Treatment is futile. It might work, but it's not ever going to make it go away, so why bother? We are living proof that that's not true. And even if it's only true for 2 people, don't you think you should try it for everyone? Another one is that mental health workers feel that people with BPD are unable to develop rapport with their mental health workers. And I can see some amount of truth in that. But what I would say to that is that people that live with BPD are extremely sensitive to any semblance of abandonment. So if we even think or have a kernel of a thought that maybe you don't like us, we're not going to open up to you. Right? So if a mental health worker comes in and makes a face when you say borderline personality disorder, there's no way you're going to overcome that. We're not going to develop a rapport with you because we can't trust you with our deepest, darkest secrets, which is how you get treated. So I could see how that would become a stigma, but that's really more on the worker than it is on the person living with the disorder. Another one is that they will not engage in treatment. And I have heard this one so many times, that people with BPD will not engage in treatment. And I will say that there is some sort of formula that has to happen. And it's not just determination, it's also hope. We talked about it before. If there's no one holding the hope for that person, they might not be successful in treatment because they can't hold the hope for themselves and they're not going to make it through the treatment, and they might not engage because they don't see the point. So I could see that to a point, but as a mental health worker, if a mental health worker is the one holding the hope for the person, like my therapist did, like my nurse did, then that person will engage in the treatment because they believe you when you tell them this is possible. And then last one is that they're unlikely to improve with treatment. And again, not true. So that's all I'm going to say on that one. But we do have another question for you all. And that is fortune. We've talked about how I was fortunate enough to have the right nurse in the right room. Ashely was fortunate enough to happen to work with me at the time, happen to be working with me when she got her diagnosis. But what kind of system do we have where fortune is such a big part of a mental health recovery story. Why should that be a part of anyone's story? Did you have anything to add to that one? Okay. We can move on then.
Hold that thought, okay?
Yeah, just hold that thought.
It's a thinker.
Does anyone have any comments on that?
I'm thinking about it.
Okay.
It's unfortunate. A lot of people go misdiagnosed all the time,
Yeah.
and then you get stigmas. But the mental health community is coming around compared to like the 80s and 90s.
Mm-hmm.
It's a
Yep.
lot better.
Yeah.
When I was diagnosed with BPD, it was only because I knew somebody in the system that could help me with a psychiatrist. Otherwise, I would have had to wait months.
Mm-hmm.
So I was fortunate enough to have somebody that knew the system and could get me in within 3 days when I was needing it the most.
That's a good point. Like, there's a big waiting list for DBT programs. And as I've started teaching it, I actually understand why. I can teach you why. DBT programs can only accept new clients on the weeks when they're in mindfulness. So going the 4 units of DBT, you do 2 weeks of mindfulness and then 6 to 8 weeks of one of the other ones, and then 2 weeks of mindfulness and then 6 to 8 weeks of one of the other ones. And you have to do that cycle twice to be considered graduated from DBT. And you can, certified DBT programs can only accept clients on the weeks when they're on mindfulness. That is the only time you can start a certified program. And so if you're looking at, they're going into like the 8-week one of them is 8 weeks long, right? And you call them the day after they finish mindfulness, it doesn't matter if there's anyone else on the list, you're still gonna be on an 8-week list because of the way the program works. And then you add to it, right? Like multiple people needing to get in, and then that's why DBT programs always have a long waiting list, is because of the nature of the program. And I think that is a good way to run a DBT program. I think you just need to have a lot of them, a lot of DBT programs, in order to serve a community more effectively, I would say. But no, that's a good point. A lot of people do end up on waiting lists, and sorry I ended up on my DBT soapbox, but yeah, it's not a good way to run a system, I don't think. So we're gonna talk about what our lives have been like since recovery a little bit. So I'm gonna let Ashely talk. I feel like.
Okay. So my story on living in recovery, I'll kind of start where I left off when I brought up DBT. So living in recovery, DBT opened so many doors for me. Like I shared in the beginning, it was hard to grasp on to all the ideas and all the exercises, but at that point, when I was introduced to the treatment, I was really ready for it. Like I said, it had made so much sense finding out what this disorder was and how it fit into my life, and explained so many things I had gone through. And then with the hope of getting better, I really just ran with the program and threw myself into it. I did really well in the first 6 months. About 4 or 5 months in, I was talking to my DBT therapist, and I told her, what are my options after I've got this done to then look at trauma work, to get in with a therapist and start working on, what may have caused this in the first place. I mentioned I also had complex PTSD. I wanted to address all those traumas that I had been carrying around for so long. And she told me, you've done so well with this program. We have this new thing that we have, DBT, prolonged exposure, which adds an additional branch off your DBT program. And it's like a trauma-informed sort of therapy. And then they wait about 6 months into your DBT program to allow you to start, because you need to have the skills to equip yourself to handle what you're about to go through and to be able to utilize all the modules that I mentioned before. You had to at least gone through them once so you can house the intense work that there is with that. So for the second portion of it, I did DBT PE. So I had about 6 hours of therapy, probably altogether a week. I'd go to DBT class, individual with a therapist, the trauma sessions, and to talk about the prolonged exposure a little bit. How that worked was I would meet with her on a weekly basis. We would go over a specific trauma event, and she'd have me have an app on my phone, and I would retell the story of that traumatic event, however long it took, over and over for up to 20 minutes, and that'd be a recording on my phone. So then homework for the week was to listen to our entire session for that week in its entirety, and then listen to that recording about 3 times. And then it also involved exposure treatment, where things I had avoided in my everyday life that were related back to that trauma, I would then expose myself to in a healthy way. So it was really intensive, and it was a lot of work, and it wasn't always pretty. It was a lot of stuff coming out, but it was a good point in my life to do that. Being a few years in from substance recovery and things like that, the skills that DBT had given me, the extensive support network I had built, people to call, and then with DBT, you have your therapist you can call at any time for help working through a specific event you're dealing with, and she was especially there for me as we were doing this work. So it was really intensive work. I think the way I came at it and was just really ready to do it and worked hard. I finished it in a year. We finished the trauma portion at the same time. Part of the recovery story was I had a diagnostic done after I completed DBT to kind of gauge where I was at and things like that. And that's when I got the news that I no longer met the criteria for borderline. So that was, like Monica kind of shared, a huge moment for me. I saw that happen in her life and hoped it for myself, but never would have imagined it could have happened in a year. That, I think just putting that work in and working as hard as I could on that really made a huge difference for me, and it just transformed my whole life. What's different today coming out of having that and going through treatment is just about everything. There's so many things I could list off that are different. The most notable thing is my relationships with people. Conflict with people, I can handle it in a much more mature, slow down, not get excitable, look at it from a reality perspective, not blow up, not yell at people. It's played out a lot in my home life with my kids. I grew up in a home where, yelling and violence, and that's how things were handled and things like that. So I became a yeller, and that's how I raised my kids. And this treatment program gave me a way to communicate with my kids and have a better understanding of them. My son had expressed to me, when you're yelling, that doesn't teach me anything. It may get the behavior to stop in the moment, but you're not teaching me anything to not do it again in the future. So it gave me the skills to regulate myself through any conflict that would come, any hard moment. It ingrained in me skills to know how to do like all those things that I hit on with the modules, bring myself down if I do start getting escalated. It really helped develop my recovery. I'm in a new program now, Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families. The way treatment has worked for me and what's different today is it's enabled me to go after a program like that where, in the beginning I did AA and got away from using substances and stuff, and then I had this program where I dealt with BPD and I dealt with my trauma, and now I'm in this program where I can look back at my childhood and maybe things that came into play, biologically and just in the home situation, the way I grew up and the way I was raised, what I went through, look at those things and take inventory on my family and myself. It's enabled me to really look at myself. When I completed DBT, I found that all that crap I was carrying around inside of me, the traumas and the hurts and all sorts of hang-ups, a lot of that was gone. It was lifted, and I kind of almost felt like a shell of a person because I had carried that around my entire life and had these tactics I would use to deal with things, and that was all gone. So there was this weird kind of grieving point where I found myself kind of just free to be myself. So, getting into this new recovery thing to then further kind of dive into things, it enabled me to house that kind of information, going back to those memories and processing those moments and taking a look at my history and why I do the things I do today. It's not perfect today. I still have challenges and things like that. That's why I've sought out this new program, changes in my home life and things like that. But I can take each moment as it is today and do the very best that I can. And if I make a mistake, the turnaround time, like pre-DBT, it was like majority of the day, every day is yelling something, some kind of fight, some kind of with a person or with my kids or something, just miserable life. Never really a moment of happiness that I can remember. It's just never being able to enjoy a moment or anything like that. And today it's a lot more peace. You know, if I slip up and I may yell about something, you know, silly at home, the turnaround time is like maybe an hour. Like I'll call my sponsor, I'll hit a meeting, I've come back into going to DBT every Friday for a refresher because we've just had some intense things happen, some dynamics changing in our homes, and, you know, with the upbringing I had, not having the information to navigate these things, using the skills I got in DBT to seek out new information, go to a class, go to a meeting, call a person, not give up, just keep moving forward. And the hope that the program gave me to continue moving forward and always being like seeking to be the best person I can be. And that'll be a never ending journey, you know, this side of the gates. You know, we're always developing, we're always, what is that called? Sanctification. All throughout this life, we're going to be growing, learning new things about ourselves, healing from things that happen to us throughout our lives. And just being able to house all that, because it's some pretty heavy stuff. And it's good now to have the skills to be able to look at all these things and realize, you know, I don't have all the answers. I don't know things I were taught weren't correct. So what is out there for me to do better? And, you know, I want to be the best person I can be, a mom, sister, friend, peer specialist, all of it. So today there's a lot more hope. There's a lot more drive, goals. I've been able to attend college again. I just finished my first semester back at college. I was able to get straight A's. I didn't think I'd be able to do that. So that was really cool. Yeah, so being able to set goals and chase after them, and if I have hiccups, just if I can't pick myself up, go to God or go to a friend or somebody and just, you know, make it through those tough moments. Enduring the uncomfortable and hard feelings is something different that's very different today. For over a decade, dealing with substances to mask and drown out any unpleasant emotions. Now I've learned to be able to sit with them. I just had a loss in my family, and I was actually grieved for the first time clean and sober, and that was very difficult. But I was able to do that, and I was able to call on people. Sometimes I didn't want to talk to anybody, and I just wanted to cry it out or just be sad. And I didn't have to run from that. I could just sit in it, and it sucked, but it's kind of part of the process. And when you lose somebody, it's hard. So that was a whole new thing for me, but I kind of inspired myself that I didn't have to run to the bar or run to the trap house to get through it. Like I had people and I had plans and skills I could rely on to get through these things. So that gives me hope that I'll be able to do this in the future, and it's just one step after another, one day at a time, and continuing on with just doing the best I can do. And what is that? Everybody's doing the best they can.
Everyone is doing the best that they can with this.
I don't think that's on. Is it on? Yeah, it's on.
Everyone is doing the best that they can with the skills that they have in the moment that they're in.
I've always loved that. I heard that early on, I think, from Monica and all throughout the program. And it's just rings so true for me because I can see in the past the way I would deal with things. It's just all I knew, and it was the level of skill that I had and information. And, you know, as Mary teaches here, there's, you know, three main things that we need. We need to get to safety. We need to get to a place where we can house these things. You know, new information, and then permission to grow and move forward. And this place has actually been huge for me in that, becoming like a second home to me in all the classes that I've attended here and learned from Mary, and that's been incredible. So being able to receive and put into practice things, that's very different today.
Yeah, life for me is quite different also. I shared earlier that I graduated with my MSW last July, but I started in 2017, and it was a 2-year program, so something happened there, huh? So it was a 2-year program, and both years we had to do an internship. And my second year internship, I was at a treatment center in Rochester, and I put in 500 hours in the internship, just like I was supposed to do. I did a huge summative project, wrote a 60-page paper about the perceptions of the clinical workers in that treatment center on whether or not they did, how well they did comorbid treatment for substance use and mental health treatment. like it was 45 hours of interviews alone. Like I put in a lot of work, and then my clinical director did not sign my piece of paper. And so the Council of Social Work Education would not allow Augsburg to defer my degree because we missed that one signature. And no one could do anything to get him to sign it. And it was a real moment of disappointment for me because getting that degree was a huge part. Like for me, that was like, I made it, I'm recovered. It's like a signpost, right? And then I was like, okay, it's disappointing, but I'll just come back next year. Well, the next year was 2020, so that did not happen. I was working at a group home at the time, and during the pandemic, I averaged 70 hours a week of work, and so I did not have time to go back to school, even with just one class. And then I eventually did go back in the fall of 2021, and that's why it took me 5 years to get a 2-year degree. I just had to retake that one class and redo an internship. And that was a big moment for me to get that degree, and then to get the license was a big moment too, and like to actually be able to add all of the initials after my name. I am actually in another master's program right now to get an MBA, so a Master's of Business Administration. Augsburg offers the MSW and the MBA as a dual degree, so I was like, well, sure. But after I finish that one, I'll have just as many initials after my name as I have in my name, and I'm very excited about that. So for me, like the education, when I was 10 years old, my mom graduated with her BSN. And my parents drugged me to Winona State University, this huge room full of like thousands of people, and made me watch as my mom walked across the stage. Our last name starts with Y. It was a long program to sit through. But within 6 months of that super long, boring thing that I went to as a 10-year-old, our entire life changed. I grew up, when I was growing up, before that, we had everything we needed and almost nothing we wanted. We never went hungry. We always had a roof over our heads. We were always warm. But like, I didn't have the Barbie comforter I wanted. I didn't have all of the Barbies I wanted. I struggle to call it poverty, but we were not doing super well. Within 6 months of watching my mom graduate, we bought a camper, we bought a huge boat, and we started camping on the river every single weekend through the summer. Our entire life changed. And I got a jet ski for Christmas that year. Like it was bonkers, right? It was a lot. And so I learned from a very young age to value education. And so for me, getting that MSW was such a big point, and it was a big point of my recovery. And so it's a really important piece to me. The other part that I would say as far as how I'm doing now is I am almost 4 months into the first relationship, like actual relationship I've had in almost a decade, and I haven't accused him of cheating at all. And I haven't asked him if I can move in yet. Growth. I feel like there's so much more. I had my car stolen a couple years ago, and it was stolen, like, I was working at this nonprofit in Rochester, and I literally parked my car like in front of my office window. Like I had an office with a window, and my car, like all you could see out my window was where I parked my car, like whatever. So I was sitting in my office, and I had gone outside in the morning for my morning cigarette, and then I went outside for my noon cigarette, and my car wasn't there. And I was like, what? It was there 2 hours ago. And I didn't freak out. I didn't get mad. I didn't throw anything. I calmly walked back in the building, and I told my boss, I said, my car's not out there anymore. And he goes, well, that's weird. And he looks out his window, and he goes, it's not. And I said, I know. I didn't do anything with it. I'm still here. And so then I calmly called the cops. I reported my car is stolen. I calmly called my insurance company and reported my car is stolen. I calmly called my banks because I remembered all my credit cards were in there. And my car was found 2 hours later by the nicest community officer. But like, that could have been so much worse. And it would have been so much worse just a few years beforehand. And so that moment for me was also a big moment of growth because I realized, like, the next day, I think I was teaching DBT, and I was like, guys, my car was stolen. And everyone was like, what? And I was like, it's not that big of a deal. And they're like, what do you mean it's not a big deal? And that really illustrated to me how far I'd come. And it's probably one of the better stories at being able to show that. I have a few others, but I don't want to keep you guys here all night. But yeah, I think it's time to open it up for questions. I do want to say, Wellness in the Woods is our employer, both of our employers. I am the director of the VPSN, the Virtual Peer Support Network that Ashely has talked about a couple times, and you can check us out on the web. That's our website there, and join anytime. Again, Fridays at 11 we do DBT. So.
Yeah, so. Ashley, I lost my mic runner, so let me run around. We just want to catch everything on the feed, so.
Just so when you no longer fit the diagnostic criteria, is that still part of your chart?
Honestly, I'm not sure if it's still on there and they keep that on there. I haven't looked at my chart since.
I think it depends on the system. So it's not on my chart at my mental health care provider, but it is at my medical care provider, but I haven't really gone through the hoops it would take to get it taken off of the second one, or at least get it changed to history of, I think would be nice.
What I've been told too about bipolar, I haven't had any significant signs of bipolar for about 5 years now, but as my provider said, you know, we'll put that in remission, but it'll remain on there just if you have something happen in the future, they just need to see at one point that's what you were diagnosed with, so maybe that gives them insight, so it may still be on there. Not sure. Mm-hmm.
So is medication at all a part of the recovery process for BP?
So there isn't one med. So like a lot of mental health diagnoses will be like, that's the miracle drug. There isn't a single one med. It's kind of like depression, anxiety. Like it's dependent upon the person. It wasn't a part of my story. So I'll go back on medication every once in a while. I have a history of seasonal affective disorder.
Okay.
And so I'll go on it sometimes to manage depression symptoms, but I usually only have to be on it for 6 months of the year.
Okay.
It wasn't an important part of my story. Sometimes in early recovery, I would use it for panic attacks because for me, the panic attacks got worse right after I started treatment than they were before because I wasn't numbing with the bad things. And so I had some PRNs for anxiety attacks, but it's really just like depression and anxiety, it's really dependent upon each person, but there isn't like DBT is like what the king of treating BPD.
Yeah, I would add, like, when I was diagnosed, I was told there really wasn't medication for it, that there was this DBT treatment, and that was about all they had to offer. My medications that I was on for bipolar previously, nothing changed. It all remained the same. So they didn't offer me any sort of medication for symptoms or anything like that. It was more of a personality, mood, behavioral kind of issue that needed like a retraining such as DBT.
So you talked about your virtual course on Fridays. How do people get referred into that? And do you have a certain number of people that can take it, and how does that work?
So it's not a certified program. It's taught from the peer perspective as a person that's used it. So that means that I don't have any criteria about attendance or who can join. Literally anyone in the state of Minnesota can hop on the Zoom at 11 on Fridays and join and learn. Like there is no kind of referral process or anything. They just, What we do is I have a PDF version of the book, and so I will put the PDF print of the whatever skills we're talking about that day in the chat, and then people can download it that way.
And to join is really simple. We've got our website up there, the mnwitw.org. So then you would just put a /VPSN, and then there's an emblem right on that page that you click, directs you right to the room. So you don't have to go onto the Zoom app and enter the room code or anything.
Yep.
That's the simplest way I've found to join.
I like using the Zoom app, but that's just me. There's a lot of ways to join.
Anybody else have questions, comments?
I went through the DBT program, and it saved my life.
Mine too.
My dad was in hospice at the time, and I knew that was short term. And one of the skills I learned was radical acceptance. Okay, I can accept my dad's got a short term and that he's going to die regardless, so I had to accept that 100%. And I was kind of preparing for when my mom died, but it was 28 days later that she died. I couldn't prepare for that, but I accepted it, that that's a part of life. You know, and that's what keeps me going every time. Any situation I go through, I know I can't change the situation. That's just the way it is. But if I accept it, then I can get through it.
Yeah, when radical acceptance, it's one of my favorite skills because I find it, as you're hinting at, I find it the most life-changing personally. I always say, like, if your car isn't working and you're convinced it's the carburetor and you take it to the mechanic and you say, fix the carburetor, but actually it's the alternator that's wrong, like, they could fix the carburetor, but your car's still not going to run because you couldn't accept the real problem. That's what radical acceptance is about. It's about learning to fix the alternator, not the carburetor. For me, the biggest thing, when I was in treatment, the biggest thing I had to accept. Ready for this? Okay. This is probably the fullest room I've ever told this story to, but I was married to my son's father, and just before our son turned 2, I had kicked him out of the house because he was spending all our money on stuff, but I had always suspected him of cheating the whole marriage. I just could never prove it, and I didn't want to break up a family on a hunch. But I kicked him out because he was spending all my money on booze, actually. And so after I kicked him out, like 6 months later, I was going through a stack of mail he had left in my bedroom, and I found a notice of filing in a paternity case against him for a child that was born 10 months after ours. That was the biggest thing I had to accept. Still fall out of it every once in a while. But that accepting that is what led to my moment when I shared I didn't have road rage. That was what I was trying to accept at the time. So yeah, radical acceptance is super powerful and incredibly life-changing, I would say.
Yeah, radical acceptance was huge for me too. The biggest thing with radical acceptance in me was going through that trauma work. Just kind of being a victim of circumstances for so many years, and then going back and looking at individual traumatic events, it required a lot of radical acceptance to look at it objectively and say these things happened, it really sucks that they happened, but they can't be changed. So dealing with all the trauma things tied to those events, like, it took a lot of acceptance to get there with it, and things that I had done that I beat myself up over for years, but there's nothing I could do to change them anymore. I just kind of had to be able to accept reality as it was, even though, you know, it wasn't, a lot of things weren't all that great. It just, like, allowed me to accept them and really enabled me to leave a lot of it in the past and move forward with my life and quit, you know, blaming people, quit looking at the way I was as a result of anything else, like, just accepting my portion of the responsibility on things and doing what I could do to change my side of the wall, take care of what I could do in my spot, and just know that, you know, some things that happen to me, I'll never know why or get an apology or anything like that, but to just leave them where they are and leave them for what, you know, kind of it is what it is kind of thing, and just be able to move forward.
Any other questions or comments? Quiet group.
Hello. I just want to tell you guys you're amazing and thank you for sharing. It was very informational. Yeah, it's now I'm a little more aware of some stuff because I know a few people that have it, but I really didn't really know anything about it. So you enlightened me a lot. So thank you.
Very welcome. And I can't speak for Ashely, but if anyone wanted to reach out to me, I think you probably know how to get in touch with Ashely, but my email is just monica@mnwitw.org instead of info on the screen, MONICA. Very simple.
Yeah, that's a way to get a hold of us, and then mine's just Ashely at MN. You know, anybody that may watch us streaming in the future, if you want to reach out to us for any reason, any questions, comments come in from online, or even if somebody were to see it and want us to do it elsewhere, we're always open for that. We really want to thank you guys for coming out tonight, allowing us to be here and to share and educate and spread some more information. There will be no Hope Dealers next week. Mary wanted me to let everybody know that, and I believe the week after there also isn't. Is that right? Maybe not? Okay, only next week. What? Oh, okay, yeah. So that. But thank you guys so much. Have a great night. Drive safe. Be blessed.
Thank you.